Thanks, Adam, for joining us, again for being a partner of this fantastic event. For those who don't know, born in the Blue Mountains.
New South Wales.
Yep. Chief Minister of the NT. Yep. Lives on a farm near Hamilton.
In Victoria.
Has offices or works out of offices in Brisbane and Perth.
Yep.
Has been to the bush summits in Tamworth, Perth, Port Lincoln, Wodonga, of course the best one, and then Rockhampton tomorrow.
Rockhampton tomorrow, very good.
So a well-rounded view.
Farms all around the country,
Yep.
so it's very good.
Yeah, a well-rounded view of what's going on clearly in regional Australia, and someone who's straddled the politics and the business side of rural and regional Australia. I mentioned in my opening, and you would have heard a lot about in WA, like 50 tractors in front of Parliament House over transmission lines. The cultural heritage laws in WA, which have now been overturned, wound back. How big is the disconnect between state and federal politicians, Canberra and the Spring Streets, St George's Terraces, the like, and rural and regional Australia at the moment?
Well, I think in the opening address by the Mayor today, Ron, I think he gave a good summation of the bureaucracy and red tape that you see in the city of Wodonga and you see in communities around Victoria, whether that's in agriculture or other industries themselves, and right around Australia. And that message, I was sitting in the audience listening and I wanted to applaud loud and clear because that's what people see. There are a lot of bureaucrats who seek to de-risk and reprogram issues and elements, whether that's in the agricultural space or petroleum and mining or energy or whatever that may be. And it's the people on the land and the country and living in those regions who suffer those consequences. And whether that's regulation around building for the housing industry and the shortages we've got in housing, or whether that's the rules that they place on people over the age of 65 who want to get back in the workforce, but they can't because of they'll lose their pension and the taxes that they will see come forward. So I think there's a big disconnect on those issues. Sometimes it's in urban areas, but particularly in regional Australia.
And how does something, and because there wasn't as much publicity in Victoria, the cultural heritage laws, there was 1,100 square metres and above, you would literally need permission to do most things on your land. How do you think something like that can happen? Is that just someone in a tall tower in the middle of Perth has thought of it and not actually thought of the consequences?
Well, I think there's still a live issue, to be honest. In Western Australia, for those in the audience, the West Australian government introduced a law designed to protect cultural sites, Indigenous cultural sites in Western Australia, which I think is something that we all want to do. But they put in place legislation that said anyone who wanted to dig a hole of 4 kilograms to put a fence post in, plant that tree over there, bury a dog that might have passed away, whatever that may be, they were going to have to go through a whole regulatory process that would cost $1,500 a day, all of these things. So the WA Premier got rid of that. That was good. But the uncertainty that we all face in our everyday lives, over and above bad roads, lack of housing, education facilities, losing childbirthing facilities in regional areas, all of that sort of stuff. When issues such as the Voice come up and the background of that Cultural Heritage Act, there is a level of uncertainty out there where people are saying, is there going to be national heritage laws in Australia? And that's an issue that we see getting raised around the country where we go.
I know Gina Rinehart in her speech on Monday spoke about net zero and the potential burden and maybe unreasonable burden on farmers and the farming industry to meet those expectations. Can you fill me in a bit and fill the audience in a bit more of that?
Yeah, I think generally Australians are happy to see a bit of a change coming forward in the way that we operate. But the net zero change that's coming forward is a bit of a blunt instrument, almost a bit of a thin edge of the wedge for people in regional Australia. And that has been something that has really come out in the bush summits where we've gone. The number one thing that I'm seeing is the issue around transmission lines and transmission towers. For us in our agricultural companies, we spend a lot on that change. So we spent $600,000 on every homestead trying to change to a solar hybrid EV system with a diesel backup. We're spending $16,000 on every electric motorbike. We're spending $150,000 on electric dual cab utes, just trialling them. They're not fit for purpose, but we're trialling them. So we spent a lot of money under Mrs Rinehart's direction to try and provide that change and trying to get to a point where it's economical. So instead of spending $5 million a year on diesel, what can we do in a smarter sense? But not every farmer in Australia has a big mining company with a big checkbook that can underwrite that. I mean, it's not financial, it's not economical. She knows that, I know that. So if you're a farmer running a canola crop like on the picture behind me, how you can spend $600,000 converting your property, particularly if you're not connected to the grid, you just can't do that. And she said in Perth that there should be a rule by governments that says there is a limit. And she suggested $200,000. There's a limit on which farmers should have to comply with that net zero obligation, because we just can't do it. And you may be in the agricultural sector feeding thousands of people in Australia and around the world, but when there's a policy coming forward on net zero, if you're going to put that in place, your livability, your sustainability for yourself, your family and your community is not going to operate. You're not going to be able to feed those thousands of people because you're putting all your money into a net zero policy. And one comment I listened to, I heard someone say on a panel in one of the other forums, they said, look at that wide open space, it's perfect for transmission lines. And, you know, you can sort of see how they get to that point, but what they're not seeing is that's a business. Yeah. Like, and I'm pointing on the screen behind me. That's a business, that's a productive business. It's no different than a factory in Tullamarine with a big roof and people in there working. It's producing money, it's making things, widgets, whatever it may be. This is a factory too. And you've got to have that respect. And that's where the bureaucrats go, look at that wide open space. We'll just compulsorily acquire an easement for a transmission line. We'll go out there, offer a few cherries of $30,000 a wind tower for that farmer. You take the money so you can pay your school fees or whatever that may be. But in 25 years' time, that farmer has got a cost of $1 million plus to decommission a wind tower, because it's not the foreign-owned energy companies who are going to be paying for the decommissioning of the wind tower. It's not them who are going to get rid of the transmission lines. It's the farmers. And this is early days. Yep. You can drive around the great state of Victoria. I live in Western Victoria. Mate, we've got these horrendous wind towers and transmission lines coming up everywhere. And I'm not anti-energy. I'm a pro-energy person. But it's early days, 25 million people. When net zero by 2030 is done, we're going to have transmission lines and wind towers all over Victoria, all over Australia. And with the immigration rate that's coming in, imagine when we're 50 million people, it's going to be a barren landscape. We're going to have no more canola fields. We're just going to have wind towers and transmission lines. There's smarter ways to do this. Mrs. Reinhardt, at the end of her Perth speech, said, let's look at nuclear. And I know that nuclear is a lost lead. And I'm not an advocate for nuclear, but I think we've got to have an open mind and look at all things that are available on the prism of opportunities. If we want to have a low-carbon energy sector, and that's what a lot of the community is saying, we listen to the community, well, let's look at smarter ways to do it, and let's not ruin the farmers' lifestyles to make it happen.
I think you can hear them. I was about to say you could hear the murmurs of agreement, but then...
Sorry, mate, that might have been a long answer to a short question. I must apologise for that.
It's certainly become a really touch-point issue. As I said, the Herald Sun's been covering it through the AusNet sort of, the local protests, but, the farmers taking it to Spring Street. I think that's the start of what's going to be a topic that all Australians are going to be talking about.
Look, and can I just make it clear? Obviously I've got a political background, but I'm not being political. I'm not in politics anymore. But given where I live, where I work, the properties we've got, the people we talk to, this is what people are saying. And this is the answer to your first question about the disconnect. Yep. You can sit in Canberra, it doesn't matter which political party, sit in Canberra or Spring Street or wherever that may be, and you can come up with these ideas and policies and what you want to do. But the people have had a gutful. And that's where the disconnect is.
Let me put your political hat back on. Oh. If you were Chief Minister of Victoria, Dan's not going to go, so you can't be Premier. No. Chief Minister of Victoria for a day, but you sit above, you've got the cabinet table. What one change would you make?
I'd clean the decks out of a lot of those head bureaucrats and start to drive policy change.
Yep.
Yeah. You need to get people on the ground. Come out and get the Mayor of Wodonga to come and be the CEO of one of these departments. Sorry, Ron, I've just promoted you. And this isn't a personal thing, but you need people grounded, because you can be in a bureaucracy and you see it in Canberra. Like, I've lived in Canberra before. A young kid goes to school, they go to university, they become a cadet in the public service, they get promoted. One day they're the secretary of the department, and they've never lived out bush, or they've never lived in another place to get a different experience. Yep. So I think one thing, I mean, there's many things, but that's one thing.
Yep. That could be fun, you and running back in Canberra or Spring Street.
No, that's not happening.
Lastly, putting your pastoral hat on, we talked about the prospect of drought or a dry coming again. How are you? How is Hancock Agricultural preparing for that?
Well, there's a lot of things that we do. I mean, we're very lucky that we're able to diversify. So in some parts of the country, such as the Kimberleys, where average rainfall in the Kimberleys going up every year, so we're getting more rainfall. So we are able to hedge against that, against some of the other properties in other parts of the country that may be suffering more challenges. But generally what we do is we try and build up a great big feed bunk. We're making sure that we've got a lot of feed for when those challenges come. We're doing our best to make sure that we've got availability of water in our company. For other farmers, it's a bit harder because particularly if you've only got one farm itself and you could be subjected to a longer period of a bad season or a bad season or two. So I think it's just about making sure that you hedge against that. For us, don't overstock too much and put it in the back pocket in the good years, so in the bad years you've got it able to be used, whether that's food or water or money or whatever that is.
10 minutes goes very quickly.
It goes quickly, I told you.
Who's passionate and doesn't talk BS. So thank you for your time. I hope it goes well in Rockhampton as well. I understand now we're going to see a short video from Hancock Prospecting's Exec Chair Gina Reinhardt, growing up on the land, and hear a bit about the plans and some events that you've got ahead. So thank you again, and fantastic.
Mate, can I just one last thing, Sam? Gina, as a mate of mine and my boss, she is passionate about the country. She'll continue to stand up and fight for regional Australians, whether you're in Victoria, Queensland, WA, wherever that may be. So she'll keep doing it.
That's great. And knowing Mrs. Reinhardt, she was watching that and she heard it.
I hope so. Hope so.
There you go. Cheers.
Good on you, mate. Thanks,
Adam.
Thanks.